My brother's wife was posting Instagram reels from my kitchen. I sat in my car across the street, watching the live feed on my phone from the security camera I had mounted inside the pantry 3 weeks ago. The frame rate was smooth. The audio was clear. Clear enough to hear her laughing at something one of her friends said. Clear enough to hear the sound of my vintage cast iron being scraped across my gas range by someone who didn't know it needed oil. I had been sitting there for 40 minutes with my coffee going cold in the cup holder, and I hadn't shivered once. When you've spent 2 years watching people steal from you in slow motion, the cold stops feeling like anything at all. They thought I was 3 states away at a grief conference for work. They didn't know I had turned around at the airport. They didn't know I had spent the last 11 days building a case file thick enough to change everything. My sister-in-law had been calling the space her studio launch venue in her bio for the past 2 weeks. 140 square feet of renovated commercial kitchen that I had sanded, painted, permitted, and paid for with my own savings over the course of 18 months. She had invited 43 people. I could see the head count from the front-facing camera. People circling the island with champagne flutes. Someone taking a photo of the custom tile backsplash I had picked out myself. The one with the hand-painted blue pattern I had ordered from a family in Portugal. My brother was leaning against the counter in the corner the way he always did at parties. Chin up, looking like he owned the room. He didn't own the room. I did. I had the deed to prove it. I opened the smart lock app on my phone and navigated to the property dashboard. I had changed the admin credentials 9 days ago. Neither of them had noticed because neither of them had ever actually managed the property themselves. They just occupied it the way water occupies a glass. Passively, without effort, without acknowledgement that the glass had to be made by someone. I took one long breath and tapped the button labeled Network Suspend. Inside the building, the router went dark. Every phone in the room dropped to carrier signal simultaneously. I watched the room shift on my infrared feed. The laughing stopped first. Then the music. My sister-in-law looked down at her phone, then up at her friends, then at my brother with that look she had perfected over the years. The look that said someone else needed to fix this immediately. Then I tapped Climate Override and pushed the temperature setting down to 54 degrees. The HVAC system in that building was one of the first things I had upgraded. It was a good system. It responded within 90 seconds. I watched the guests begin to drift toward their coats. I wasn't doing this to torture anyone. I was doing this to ensure that when the police arrived, they would find a building full of people who had been there long enough to have no plausible deniability, in a space that belonged to someone who was about to make that very clear in writing. Let me tell you how I got here. My mother died in February of the year before last. She left behind a 3-bedroom house, a small savings account, a ceramic cookie jar full of birthday cards she had never thrown away, and an informal understanding that the commercial property she had co-signed for me to purchase would remain in my name, free and clear, and would eventually become the foundation for the catering business I had been planning since culinary school. She never formalized a will because she was 51 years old and no one thought she needed one yet. That was the first crack. My brother, who was 4 years older than me, and had spent most of his adult life treating our mother's generosity like a renewable resource, stepped into that crack, the way he stepped into everything, smoothly, confidently, and without asking. Within 6 weeks of the funeral, he had convinced our aunt that our mother had intended for the estate to be split differently than the standard division. Within 8 weeks, he had quietly moved into the house, citing a temporary cash flow problem with his renovation business. Within 3 months, his wife had redecorated the living room and started referring to the house as theirs in conversation with people who didn't know better. I let it go. Not because I was weak, because grief makes you prioritize badly, and because I was working 60-hour weeks at the time, and because I told myself family was family and the property was mine on paper and I could sort out the rest when my head cleared. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was not checking the business account more carefully. I am a licensed compliance auditor. I review financial irregularities for a regional insurance group, which means I spend my days looking at the microscopic space between what a document says and what the underlying data confirms. I am good at finding the place where those two things stop matching. I do it for clients every single day. I just didn't think to do it for myself. When I finally did, 18 months after my mother died, the picture was not ambiguous. My brother had opened a line of credit against the commercial property. $41,000, drawn in 3 tranches over the course of 14 months. The signature on the initial loan agreement looked like mine. It was not mine. I had been out of the country for a compliance training when the first draw was signed. I have the passport stamps to confirm it. The notary seal on the document was issued by a notary whose license had lapsed 6 weeks before the date on the form. That was the kind of detail my brother hoped I would never look for. It was the kind of detail I find in my sleep. There were also the utilities. For 9 months, my sister-in-law had been collecting energy assistance payments through a state low-income housing program, claiming she was a tenant in the commercial property, paying rent to a landlord of record. There was no landlord of record. I was the owner. She was not a tenant. She had fabricated the lease she submitted with the application, including a rent receipt with my forged signature, and collected just under $19,000 in state funds before the program cycle ended. I sat with that number for a long time. $19,000. The same amount I had saved during the first 2 years after culinary school, working 4 days a week at a catering firm and 2 nights at a hotel banquet kitchen, skipping vacations, driving a car with a cracked dashboard, and no working air conditioning through 2 Mississippi summers, telling myself it would be worth it when I had my own space. $19,000. Gone. Rerouted through a program designed for people who actually needed it, into an account belonging to a woman who had spent the previous summer complaining about the wait list for a particular brand of patio furniture. The part that broke me was not the money. The part that broke me was a voicemail. I had called my brother in September, just to talk. We hadn't spoken in a few weeks, and I was having a hard day. The anniversary of my mother's death was coming, and I just wanted to hear a familiar voice. He didn't answer. I left a message saying I missed him, that I hoped things were going well, that maybe we could have dinner soon. He never called back. But 3 days later, I was going through the voicemail folder on the property's business line, which was still linked to his phone from a period when he had briefly acted as a property manager, and I heard something he had accidentally left. A pocket dial, 32 seconds of his voice in what sounded like his kitchen. He was talking to his wife. She was asking him if I had contacted the lender. He said I wasn't going to find anything because I was too busy being sentimental about Mom to pay attention to anything real. She laughed. I saved the recording in 3 separate places. I spent the next 3 months building my file. I hired a forensic document examiner to analyze the loan signature. I submitted a records request to the state housing agency. I pulled the lapse notary's public record from the state licensing board. I recovered the metadata from the digital lease my sister-in-law had submitted as a PDF, which showed it had been created on her laptop 11 days before she claimed it was a 3-year-old agreement. I documented every month of utility bills, every bank statement, every wire transfer, every access log from the property's smart system, which had been logging keypad entries since the day I installed it. I didn't go to the police right away. I needed them to be somewhere they couldn't immediately walk away from when I did. That was why I had let my sister-in-law post about the launch event. That was why I had said nothing when she asked my brother to confirm the venue was available. A question my brother had answered on my behalf without asking me. The way he answered everything on my behalf without asking me. That was why I was sitting in a parking lot at 9:45 on a Thursday night, with a binder in my passenger seat, and a phone call already placed to the non-emergency line 40 minutes ago, reporting a potential trespassing situation at my commercial address, and asking that a unit swing by when available. The unit was pulling onto the block now. I watched the patrol car slow in front of the building. I watched the officer step out, look at the darkened windows, look at the people now visible through the glass moving toward the exit in coats. I got out of my car. The air was cold and tasted like rain that hadn't fallen yet. I crossed the street with the binder under my arm. My sister-in-law saw me first. She had been standing near the entrance, phone in hand, presumably trying to call my brother who was still inside. When she saw me, her face went through 3 distinct expressions in about 2 seconds. The first was surprise. The second was the particular recalibration of someone who has been caught doing something and is rapidly constructing an explanation. The third was the smile she always defaulted to, the warm, slightly confused smile that implied she couldn't imagine why there might be any tension here at all. "Oh my gosh," she said, stepping toward me with her arms slightly out, as if we might hug. "What are you doing back? I thought your conference was this weekend." "It is," I said. "I came back early." She glanced at the patrol car. The officer was walking toward us from the curb. "Is everything okay?" she asked, dropping her voice the way you do when you want to seem concerned, and also when you want to set a particular tone before someone else does. "It's going to be," I said. My brother appeared at the doorway, guests filing past him onto the sidewalk in clusters, confused and chilled and already posting about the unexpected early end to the evening. He saw the officer. He saw me. He put on the face he had been putting on since we were children, the one that said he was the reasonable one, the competent one, the one who could explain everything if everyone would just calm down. "Hey," he said to me, with a nod, like we were running into each other at a gas station. "Didn't know you were back." "I know you didn't." The officer reached us. He was older, methodical looking, with the particular patience of someone who had mediated a lot of family disputes and had developed strong opinions about whose side he was on as a result, which was to say, no one's, until the paperwork told him otherwise. "Got a call about a trespassing concern at this address," he said. "Somebody want to tell me what's going on?" My brother stepped forward immediately. He was good at this, the first to speak move, because it let him establish the frame before anyone else could. "There's no trespassing. This is a family property. My sister owns the space and our family uses it regularly. There may have been a miscommunication about tonight's event. We can straighten this out without involving anyone." "It's not a miscommunication," I said. I handed the officer the first document in the binder. The warranty deed. My name, the address, the recording date. "I'm the sole owner of this property," I said. "I did not authorize tonight's event. I did not authorize my brother or his wife to use this space, invite guests, or represent it publicly as a venue. I revoked their keypad access code 6 days ago and changed the Wi-Fi credentials. They used a code my brother had photographed from the original setup manual, which he took without permission, to regain entry. The officer looked at the deed. He looked at my brother. My brother's expression didn't break. He was very good at this. "She's been going through a hard time since our mother passed," he said, not unkindly, which was the cruelest way to say it. "She has been struggling. We've been trying to support her. We use this space together as a family. I think there's been some wires crossed and she's reading the situation wrong." The officer looked at me. I was familiar with this moment. I had watched it happen to other people, in other contexts. The moment when the calm, well-spoken person in the room sets a narrative that positions the person with legitimate grievances as the unstable one. It is remarkably effective. It works so often that it has become a strategy. Maybe not consciously, maybe just instinctively, but a strategy nonetheless. I had prepared for it. "I understand that's the framing he's going to use," I said. "I'd like you to look at the second tab." The officer turned to it. It was a forensic document analysis, stamped and signed, examining the loan application filed against this property 14 months ago. "That loan was filed with a forged signature," I said. "I was in Montreal on the date it was notarized. Here is my passport stamp." The notary whose seal appears on that document had a lapsed license. The state licensing board record is behind it. My brother's jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second. "That's an administrative error," he said. The lender was aware. It was being corrected. $41,000 was drawn before any correction was made, I said. The officer had stopped flipping and was reading carefully now. My sister-in-law moved closer to my brother. She put her hand on his arm. It looked like comfort. I think it was coordination. "Officer," she said, and her voice was the warm one again, the reasonable one. "This is clearly a family situation that got out of hand. My husband and I have been managing this property for over a year. We have records. We have an informal agreement. His sister is in a difficult emotional place, and I think she may have gotten some bad information that has upset her. We don't want to make this into something legal. We just want to have a conversation as a family. Do you have any documentation of that informal agreement?" the officer asked. Not unkindly, just asking. She reached into her bag without hesitation, which told me she had brought it with her, which told me she had anticipated some version of this conversation might happen tonight. She pulled out a 2-page document and handed it to the officer. It was a co-management agreement, dated 14 months ago, with my signature at the bottom. I looked at it. I had never seen it before in my life. My signature was not bad. She had practiced. If you saw it on its own, without comparison, it was plausible. My brother smiled just slightly, not a triumphant smile, a relieved one, the kind that said he had been holding that card for a while and was glad to finally put it down. The officer looked at me. "Can you confirm whether you signed this document?" "I did not," I said. "She's going to say that," my sister-in-law said, not harshly, sadly, even, as if this was painful for her. "I'm sure she is," the officer said. He looked at the document again. "Do you know what printer this was produced on?" She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The document. What printer was used?" Our home printer. A standard one." I opened the binder to the tab I had marked with a small orange sticker. "Every color laser printer embeds a machine identification code in printed documents," I said. "It's a pattern of microscopic yellow dots, invisible to the naked eye, that encodes the printer's serial number and the exact date and time the document was printed. I had this document's metadata extracted by a forensic lab." I handed the report to the officer. "That co-management agreement was printed 4 days ago," I said, "at 11:17 in the morning. The serial number matches an HP LaserJet registered to my brother's home address." The silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of a misunderstanding being sorted out. It was the silence of a frame collapsing. My brother spoke first. "It's a reprint," he said. "The original got water damaged. We reprinted it from the original file. The file creation date on the embedded metadata is also 4 days ago," I said. "It was not reprinted from an existing file. It was created new." The officer set the document down. He looked at my brother with an expression that had lost all of its earlier deference. "Sir," he said, "do you have any other documentation? Utility bills in your name? A bank record listing this address?" My brother patted his jacket pocket. He looked at his wife. She looked at the ground. "There may be some things at home," my brother said. "There's something else," I said. I turned to the tab I had dreaded using the most. Not because I wasn't certain of it, because using it made everything permanently different, and there was a version of me that had spent months hoping I was wrong about what it contained. I wasn't wrong. For 9 months between last year and this year, my sister-in-law collected state energy assistance payments through the low-income housing program, I said. She submitted documentation claiming she was a tenant in this property. The lease she submitted had my forged signature. The income she reported to qualify for the program was 40% of what her actual household income was in that period. The total amount collected was $18,740. I handed the officer the copy of the assistance application, the forged lease, the state payment records, and the income comparison I had assembled from publicly available business filings. My sister-in-law's hand slipped off my brother's arm. That program is designed for households that qualify based on genuine financial need, I said. She did not qualify. She knowingly submitted false documentation to collect benefits. That's not a civil matter. That's wire fraud. My brother turned to look at her. I had wondered how that moment would feel. I thought it might feel like something. It didn't, particularly. It felt like watching a math problem resolve. I want to call my attorney, my sister-in-law said. That's your right, the officer said. He had taken a radio from his belt. He spoke into it briefly, requesting a second unit and a supervisor. He looked at my brother. I'm going to need you to stay on the property while we get some additional officers here and go through this documentation more carefully. I'd advise you not to go back inside the building. You can't keep us here, my brother said. I'm not keeping you anywhere, the officer said. I'm asking you to stay while we sort this out. You're welcome to leave. But if you do, that becomes a different kind of conversation. My brother stayed. My sister-in-law made a phone call. I watched her pace the sidewalk, speaking in a low, rapid voice. She kept glancing at me, at the binder, at the patrol car. Then she walked toward me. She stopped about 4 feet away, and something in her expression shifted into something I hadn't seen from her before. Not the warmth, not the strategy. Something flatter and more honest than either of those. You've been planning this for a long time, she said. Yes, I said. You could have just talked to us. I looked at her for a moment. I left my brother a voicemail in September, I said. I said I missed him. I said I hoped things were going well. He didn't call back. I paused, but 3 days later I heard him tell you I was too sentimental to notice what was happening. So I think we both know a conversation was never what this was going to be. She looked at me. Then she reached into the inner pocket of her coat. I watched her hand come out. I watched what she did next. She was smooth about it. If I hadn't been watching her specific hands specifically, I might have missed it. But I had been watching, and I didn't miss it. She stepped toward me like she was going to say something else, and her hand dipped toward my coat pocket for just under a second. I stepped back. Officer, I said. My voice was completely even. He turned. I need you to look at the camera mounted on the exterior of the building, I said. The one above the entrance. It has been recording since before any of us came outside. I need you to review the last 45 seconds of that footage before you let anyone touch my coat. My sister-in-law went still. The officer looked at her. He looked at my coat pocket. He looked at the camera. He asked his colleague, who had arrived with the second unit, to retrieve the footage. It took 6 minutes. The footage showed clearly what she had done and when she had done it. The officer walked toward her. She didn't run. She stood there with her arms at her sides and looked at my brother, who was looking at the ground, and the space between them in that moment was about 2 feet wide and about 3 years deep. The second officer found the small bag in my coat pocket. My sister-in-law was arrested on suspicion of evidence planting in addition to the fraud charges. My brother was detained for questioning regarding the forged loan documentation and the co-management agreement. I stood on the sidewalk until the patrol cars left. The street was quiet after. The guests had long dispersed, some of them probably already posting about the drama, already editing the story into something entertaining and clean. The Portuguese tile in my kitchen was probably still dirty from the party. The cast iron was probably still on the stove. I went inside. I turned the heat back up to 68 degrees. I reconnected the router to the main network. I stood in the kitchen for a moment looking at the tile, at the countertops I had poured myself, at the pendant lights I had chosen from a catalog I had looked at every night for a week before deciding. I thought about my mother, briefly. Not with sadness exactly, but with the quiet recognition that she had believed in this space before it existed, and that it had survived everything that had tried to undo it, and that it was still here, still mine, exactly as she had helped me make it. I washed the cast iron carefully, dried it on the burner, oiled it the way it needed to be oiled. I put a kettle on. While the water heated, I opened the case file on my laptop, the folder I had labeled, Documentation, Complete, and looked at everything one more time. 3 years of patience. 11 months of active collection. Every forged signature, every metadata timestamp, every state filing, every lapse license, every transfer record. All of it organized in exactly the order I had rehearsed. I didn't delete it. I saved a copy to the cloud, a copy to the external drive, and forwarded the relevant files to the civil attorney I had retained 2 weeks earlier, who was already drafting the suit to recover the $41,000 from the fraudulent loan draw. Then I made tea and sat at the counter I had poured myself. The building was quiet and warm. Outside, somewhere, my brother was explaining to a police supervisor why a document he claimed was 14 months old had been created on his laptop 4 days ago. His wife was in a different room, probably saying she wanted to talk to her attorney, probably running the same calculations she ran on everything, looking for the angle that got her out cleanest. There wasn't one. I had made sure of that. My phone buzzed. A notification from the smart lock system confirming that the access code my brother had used to enter the property tonight had been permanently deactivated. I set the phone face down on the counter. I looked at the tile. I looked at the ceiling I had painted myself. A cream white that took 4 coats to get right. I took a sip of tea. For the first time in 2 years, the space felt the way I had always imagined it would feel. Not triumphant. Exactly. Quieter than that. The way something feels when it finally belongs to you again, the way it was supposed to from the start. I finished my tea. Then I opened the folder labeled Catering Business Plan, the one I had been too afraid to work on while everything else was unresolved, and I read the first page. It felt like beginning,